Should Pokemon GO stay or go away?
And should Apple be forced to open up the iPhone to the banks? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel. Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm here with a man who just wants a nice comfy Pokeball to hide in most days, Alex Kidman. We're also joined by tech and Pokemon enthusiast Matthew Wu. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me on, guys.
Alex, what's new in tech?
The National Broadband Network's second satellite, Skymaster 2, is on track to launch from South America on the 5th of October. It'll provide additional capacity for customers in the satellite NBN footprint, including everyone on Norfolk Island. You've still got to be essentially remote for NBN satellite to be your connection of choice, however, with every other NBN connection type still set to deliver faster connection speeds.
Twitter has a case of Olympics fever, teaming up with the 7 Network, Australia's official broadcaster from Rio, to post video highlight snippets. It's part of the Twitter Amplify partnership program, which allows for a pre-roll of up to 6 seconds, just in case you thought you might be able to escape the relentless Olympics advertising campaigns.
BlackBerry has unveiled its latest handset, the BlackBerry DTEC 50. Unlike every previous BlackBerry phone, which were all custom hardware, BlackBerry's latest Android handset is instead essentially a reskinned Alcatel Idol 4 with a slew of security upgrades bolted on. No specific word on when it'll launch here in Australia, but overseas pricing suggests it'll actually be more expensive than the Idol 4 it's based upon.
Australia's consumer watchdog, the ACCC, is launching an inquiry into the country's broadband speeds and whether people are getting what they pay for in terms of speed and performance. It also wants to establish a monitoring system so we can learn what most of us already know, that Australia's broadband can be pretty terrible.
So, Adam, the ACCC inquiry, useful or useless?
Well, these are the people who seem genuinely surprised when the price of petrol goes up before a long weekend. It's really taken them this long to figure out, and do they really understand what they're talking about? Because part of it is they want to make sure that they're delivering on their plans in terms of value and stuff like that, and that's good. That's something that you can monitor. But they also want to crack down on people promising speeds that they can't deliver, and they're citing examples of, like, you're paying Optus for 100 megabit per second cable, but then when everybody's using it, it slows down to 10 megabits per second. Now, yes, this is a real problem, and I can see why they need to talk about it. But the problem is that we need actually a new broadband network that works. And we had the opportunity to do it properly, and we've thrown that away, and now we're building this bloody Frankenstein network that's going to have the same problems. So I really don't see what they hope to achieve.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the promised speeds thing, there are regulations around some of the things that ISPs can and can't state, and there's stuff that they have to do to remain compliant. The speed boost one is a difficult one, and I say this as someone who has been on Optus cable. I'm now on Telstra cable, and both of them do the same thing. They've got a flat rate plan, and then they've got a speed boosted plan, which you pay a little bit more for. And you're absolutely right. There are certain points of the day where I can absolutely fly on this thing, and there are certain points of the day where I'm thinking, gee, where did I leave that dial-up modem? Yeah. But I don't know that it's difficult, I suppose. I don't know that there's a lot of outright deception going on here, in the way that they have stepped in previously on things like claims about the word unlimited, for example. Yeah. Unlimited has a very, very specific meaning, because a lot of the providers were very iffy about this stuff.
Yes.
I don't think they're quite as dodgy on that. They're fairly upfront to say, look, this gives you the potential when the network conditions are right, and dependent on what you're connecting to as well. And this is always the thing that no one's ever really going to be able to do. Even if we went fibre to, everyone in Australia all the way across to Norfolk Island and all those other various territories and principalities and so on that we have, even if it was fibre everywhere, you still could not guarantee an absolute speed to everything, because it depends on both ends of the connection.
Yeah. I think the thing that is encouraging, because like I said, we're building a new network, so some of this is going to become irrelevant. But one of the things they mentioned is cracking down on telcos who don't buy enough capacity to actually deliver on their promises. So you're, I don't know, you're telco X, and you're using the NBN network. Now, it's not you didn't design the NBN, but if you sign up 1 million customers, but then go to NBN wholesale and only buy enough capacity to serve 20 of them, and then say, oh, sorry, everybody, we promised you 100 megabits per second, but you'll all have to share this tiny pipe. The ACCC wants to crack down on that. It wants to make sure that telcos aren't skimping on their back end what they pay the NBN so that customers get screwed. That I like the sound of, because that is something they actually can control. And the same with contention ratios and how many people share a link and stuff like that. If they could force them to fix that, that would make a huge difference. So Matthew, what do you reckon?
I'm fortunate enough to live in an apartment which is FTTP connected under the old NBN.
Oh, well, thanks for joining us, Matthew. And next week.
But Adam, I grew up in an area where I was only pulling 4 megabits from the exchange, and I'm a nerd, so I understand that ASL 2 Plus is theoretically a maximum of 24 megabits, with many factors determining that number. But you can see how everyday Australians get frustrated when they have to wait 5 minutes to buffer a YouTube video in 360p, even when they were sold extra super fast, quick broadband internet. So there is some warrant there.
So Alex, the big banks are a little bit scared about doing business with Apple and Apple Pay. What's going on there?
Well, I think they've seen what doing business with Apple is like. It can be a very combative thing.
Having said that, the music industry.
It can be very, very profitable too, and banks are all about profit. And what has been happening, or what seems to have been happening, or what various off-the-record sources seem to have indicated, is that the big problem with Apple Pay has been one of deciding on the interchange fee. In the States, Apple was able to get a really good deal on this because there really wasn't a whole lot of tap and go stuff, so they were rolling out something new, and they could say to the banks, look, we're kind of handling the back end of this so you don't have to. So there was a bit of give and take there. Here in Australia, and we've kind of covered this before, you know, contactless payments are very much a thing that people get, and the banks could very much say to Apple, well, look, no, the rates you want, we're not going to pay. Now, they haven't officially said this, but what they're now doing is they're actually saying, well, actually, the iPhone's got such a presence in Australia that we feel that it's a monopoly. We feel as though we should have access, because one of the nastier things that Apple did when it introduced NFC on iPhones, because NFC was not new, it was not Apple's invention. It was
you sure? I thought Apple invented NFC. Didn't they invent everything?
Not quite.
Music players? The internet?
To get back on topic, when they threw NFC in, they did it with Apple Pay as the only available thing it could do. So the other applications for NFC, things like NFC speakers, for example, which would work with any other NFC device, do not work with iPhones because the NFC radio is actually locked down in that way, such that it talks Apple Pay and nothing else.
And that's
the banks are trying legally to force Apple's hand. And look, honestly, I don't feel that they've got a huge chance here. No.
What do you think, Matthew? How do you reckon this might play out?
The biggest thing that's interesting to me is the fact that ANZ is the only one of the big four that hasn't actually appealed to the ACCC. It's also interesting as well because ANZ is the only bank in Australia that has actually partnered with Apple Pay officially, along with American Express, of course. But we have to also keep in mind that it's not only it's only the iOS and Apple variants, and it's not Android, because most of the banks all have Android apps already that work with NFC. So
basically, ANZ doesn't want to piss off Apple too much because they've already got access to Apple Pay. It's the others thinking, we don't know if we really want to play by Apple's games because we see what they've done to everything else. Why don't you just let us use the bloody NFC chip like we can in any other phone? Is that it in a nutshell?
Basically. Also, we have to be aware that it's also the Apple Watch as well. It's not just the phone, but the watch as well.
Oh, yeah.
For the 4 or 5 people who bought an Apple Watch so far, of course.
Suckers.
I think there is also a certain muscle thing with this. ANZ's been very proactive because they've got Apple Pay, they've got Android Pay, and whilst the big banks have their own Android apps, they don't have Android Pay on board. Citibank is so far the only one that's got Samsung Pay outside of Amex, and Amex obviously charges its own fees around that, and I'm sure they're not going to go broke anytime soon. But to my understanding, ANZ is the smallest of the big 4 banks. The other 3 are kind of the big fish in that particular pond. So they've perhaps got a bit more muscle when it comes to saying, well, actually, we don't necessarily want to play Apple's game, and for that matter, hand that much control over to Apple. Because the thing with something like Android Pay, for example, is it's across all sorts of payment infrastructure. Samsung, whilst they have Samsung Pay, and obviously that's their own technology, they're at least on the record as saying, look, we're kind of interested in working with the banks around this and seeing where we can get to with that. And, you know, they haven't said anything further publicly, but they're at least interested in talking that way, whereas Apple seems to be its usual kind of brick wall of it's Apple's way or the highway.
Yeah.
Also, I think that Australia's kind of landscape in wireless payments on FPOS terminals and wireless payments actually is breeding a ground of do customers in Australia really care about mobile payments and wireless payments with the phone and with the watches? So why not just use my card that I get that everyone has? So that's going to be an interesting development as well.
Yeah, you're right. I think the thing is, I mean, I've finally started playing because my bank was one of the ones that picked up Android Pay because it's an ex-credit union, and most credit unions picked up Android Pay when it launched. I've finally had the chance to kind of play around with that in local stores, and it's a convenience factor. If I rushed out and I'd forgotten my wallet for whatever reason, I could use my phone in theory to pay for stuff until it falls over, and then I really want to go back to having my plastic card anyway.
You always look like an arse though when you're paying with your phone or your watch, and especially if it doesn't work, then you look like an even big arse.
Absolutely. I had the experience. Optus have their own version of this as well, and they demoed and trialed their wearable stuff at Mobile World Congress last year, and they gave me this watch which was meant to do payments for food and so on. And so, you know, full disclosure, I accepted a sandwich from Optus. You may now judge me. But the problem was, the first 3 times I went to pay for it, it didn't work. And I'm surrounded by people who do mobile telecoms, and they're all still looking at me like I'm a massive dick because I'm standing there thumping this watch against a payment terminal. So, Matthew, Pokemon GO has been live now, not just in Australia, but in most parts of the world for a couple of weeks. That initial huge hype wave seems to be starting to slow down, which makes it a really interesting time to analyse whether or not it's actually been a good thing or a bad thing, because there have been stories from both sides. Now, I know you're a huge Pokemon GO enthusiast. You're, in fact, a much more keen player than I am. What's your experience been like so far?
Okay, so I think for context, I'm level 26. I've been playing since day one. Interestingly, I've met many friends that I would not have met or even dreamed of interacting 4 weeks ago, and I feel like a lot of Pokemon Go fans are actually in the same boat as well. It's an amazing social game. It's going to keep growing. Like you said, nearly every single country, every single major country around the world has access to the game now. And there was interesting research, I think only a few days ago, that the average Pokemon Go player is actually 25 years old, college educated, and a white woman making $90,000 a year. I'm not sure which 25-year-old is making $90,000 a year, but...
Well, I was going to say I'd like to meet her. Maybe I should start playing this game.
Well, look, if you play Pokemon Go, you're going to be making $90,000 a year, so get on it, guys.
This is not a promise or guarantee.
Yes.
This week at Comic-Con, there were a few big reveals as well from the creator of Pokemon Go. To make it even more social, they're going to introduce the future ability to trade with other trainers in an update. So there's a big social network effect with this game. The more people that play it, the more valuable the game is, and the more fun the game becomes. And obviously Nintendo, Niantic, and Pokemon Company make more money.
Is this going to turn into one of those I stabbed my friend because he stole my magic sword scenarios?
Interestingly, hopefully not.
Just, you know, thinking out loud.
Well, in the end, when the whole world is playing Pokemon and Pokemon Go, fun things will happen. So we'll see what happens.
See, I mean, I find it interesting in that it's certainly still a very big thing. I wonder if it hasn't crested, though. And this is purely anecdotal, kind of from taking public transport in Sydney, where a week ago I could look through a train carriage and I'd probably see a dozen or more screens, which were very obviously a Pokemon trainer, you know, rapidly running along the train lines, as you do in real life. I now will maybe see 1 or 2, if at all. And it's hit that point as well where a certain quantity of the game, that the gyms portion is very much the purview of the really dedicated players and the players who are pumping serious money into it. Now, I have enjoyed what I've played, and I've played it a bit with my kids. I haven't put any money into it. Matthew, I understand you have spent money on Pokemon Go?
I have spent a little bit of money on Pokemon Go. It was $30.
How much is a little bit?
$30 to buy Pokemon Pokecoins, I should say, which then enables you to buy in-game items. I purchased it pretty early on because I knew that I would be dedicating my next month or so, which is in about 2 days, when it marks 30 days, I think. To basically playing this game. So $30 to get a faster advantage over the majority of people isn't that bad of a trade-off. But as you were saying,
it's a great entertainment value in that sense. Yeah, sure.
For sure. Well, definitely there's been many nights where instead of going out and drinking and buying food, I have been starving outside Melbourne State Library playing Pokemon Go in the cold.
Pokemon Go made me starve. That's the headline.
And so, what did you buy? Like winged shoes or something? What did you buy that gives you the advantage over other people?
So in-game items consist of many different abilities. The thing that I purchased was these things called Lucky Eggs, which when activated gives you 30 minutes of basically double XP. So any experience that you earn by catching Pokemon or spinning Pokestops, you get double experience, so effectively cutting half of your time that you would have spent playing the game.
Okay, I can get my head around that.
As long as you use it sensibly, and I guess as long as you're in the right kind of area, I can imagine, and I haven't personally surveyed Melbourne, but I can imagine it's probably rich and ripe. When the game launched, interestingly, I was in a very small part of regional New South Wales, and once you get outside the big population centres, the number of stops and even just the number of Pokemon that spawn goes down massively. It's actually a very, very different and much harder game, actually, in a way, in terms of levelling up, than it is in the big cities.
Rural areas are actually definitely disadvantaged with this game. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, Pokemon Go was built on Ingress, Niantic's previous game. And in Ingress, there was these things called XMP areas, I think. And the more congested areas with more XMP, the more Pokemon would spawn in those areas. So in rural areas, there'll be less Pokemon because of the fact that it wasn't popular.
But Ingress players started complaining about the same thing, didn't they? That it was just too hard to play if you were in a rural area.
Correct. So I guess if you are wanting to really dedicate your life to playing Pokemon Go, you want to move to the city.
But is that something they need to address if they really want this thing to have some staying power? Do they need to think about ways to make it more accessible for regional players, or is there so many people in the city that they just don't care?
I think it all depends on how many people in the rural places are actually playing Pokemon Go. I mean, with Ingress, a lot of people that were playing that, and it was in beta for a long time, they submitted places where they could add more key points of interest in the game. So I guess with Pokemon Go, rural players might suggest places in rural areas where additional Pokemon could spawn from, more Pokestops to get Pokeballs and more experience, etc., etc. So I think it's a very community-based and very feedback-based system, and I think Niantic have actually acknowledged the fact that rural areas don't get as much Pokemon. So, I mean, the developers are listening to their players, which is always just a good thing to see.
There is also a bit of a dark side, and certainly there's been some hype around this, but some of it I think has been justified, and it's probably worth discussing. There's this whole issue around large quantities of people converging on public spaces, which they've got the right to do, but whenever you get a large quantity of people in a public space, there's a certain amount of littering, there's a certain amount of damage. The big case for this in Australia seems to be in one of the Sydney suburbs, Rhodes, which has a very, very small park, which has 3 Pokestops in very close proximity and seems to spawn an extraordinary quantity of quite rare Pokemon, to the extent that they've had lots and lots of people there most evenings, which has just destroyed the grass in the park, but has also made a lot of noise for people. and in some cases has been disruptive, apparently, to emergency vehicles. There have been reports of police being called out, and there really isn't a good legal framework for this stuff, because it's virtual stuff and individuals are doing it, but they're being entreated to do it by a company that isn't based in Australia. And it's, you know, it's fascinating, but it's difficult and it's challenging because it's not exactly something that the local councils necessarily were prepared for either.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a place in Melbourne that's called Lilydale Lake, which is exactly the same situation that Rhodes is happening. But unfortunately, when you have a sudden and continuous influx of hundreds of people in an area that's not built to house so many people, like for example at a music festival, these things do tend to happen. Many residents at Rhodes and even Pokemon GO players actually have contacted Niantic to request to remove 2 Pokestops in Rhodes to effectively reduce the amount of foot traffic. They haven't yet fixed the problem or even acknowledged it, but I'm assuming that this is probably due to the fact that they're probably inundated with the global expansion rollout and other more pressing issues like service stability, etc, etc. But I saw something today also from Victoria's Road Authority today. They had electronic notices along the highways warning people not to drive and Pokemon Go. Anyone caught playing Pokemon Go while driving, which obviously means that you're interacting with your mobile while you're driving, so texting, calling, checking Facebook, tweeting that you're about to get caught, would face a 4-point demerit fine as well as $500 off your wallet.
Oh, come on, triple demerit points. Come on, well, it's like a long weekend.
The thing is, there's at least a legal framework for that kind of thing. And I'm sorry, if you are if you're interacting with something like Pokemon Go while you're driving, you're an idiot.
Yes.
You really
Get off my lawn and watch the road.
that's kind of ridiculous. But I think, I mean, your point on them being busy with making sure the game runs well, you know, that's their concern. Public safety is perhaps a higher and more pressing concern, maybe. It's difficult to know, and I've got one of my work colleagues lives right next door to a public park, and the Pokestop that's been placed is, depending on the GPS of the phone that's using it, either appears slightly within the public park or slightly on his driveway. And he's continually having people walking up his driveway because they've basically got their faces buried in their phones. And that is, I mean, that's genuinely private property, but you do hear that line of, well, is that the individual responsibility? And someone driving in a car playing Pokemon Go, that's totally individual responsibility because that could be any app. Or is that on the virtual placement of a landmark in the real world?
There's probably a simple way of addressing this. Niantic just has to appoint someone to review all of the submissions from the public or the councils or even police authorities. There's always a chance though that some Pokemon player might not want the gym next to someone else's house because they always control it. So I guess
totally they'll try and game the game.
Exactly, they'll game the game. So in the end, there needs some sort of verification authority and a person who's basically fact-checked all this. What are the legal ramifications? Not too sure, but I'm sure that there will be 1 or 2 cases popping up in the next few weeks because of the global rollout that's happening over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me because they've not only, you know, topped the free app charts, but they've very solidly topped the top grossing app charts. So clearly, right at the moment, they are making all the money. And it might not be a terrible PR exercise, if nothing else, to say, right, we are appointing staff in all of our locations to fast-track this review process, because that would actually take a lot of the steam out of the, well, they're not removing these things kind of argument. Well, that just about wraps it up for this episode of Vertical Hold, but we did fail to not mention Pokemon Go this week. I may have mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it. Now remember, if you've got any comments, hit us up in the comments section on YouTube, via Twitter, or the Facebook Vertical Hold page. Thanks to Matthew for joining us for the show.
It's been an extreme pleasure, guys.
And thanks everyone for listening, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Alcatel.